Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building Bigger Lives podcast. I'm Michael Regan along with Kathryn Peterson, and today we're welcoming into the podcast another guest. And as you've heard or seen, if you've been following our podcast, we've recently been weaving in some interviews with folks around the housing industry that we feel are having a huge impact, and sometimes stories that you may not have heard about or storylines that you may not be familiar with. And we always look for unique individuals. I can think of no better description than unique for my friend John Donnelly, who joins us. John is a veteran of the housing industry. He can tell us a little bit more about that when we exchange, but he currently serves in a role with Service First Mortgage out of Dallas, Texas. And that particular role he has held and probably evolved in over the last 15 years as he's done many different things for that company. But here's what I know about John. John is a growth-oriented person, both personally and professionally. And what we're going to hear about are some things in his growth ideology so that we can learn from him on what are some of those things that really drive that passion to grow as an individual and how that plays out when he's engaging with this team. You know, John is certainly a man of many interests. We'll maybe dig into a few of those things, including how does a guy straight in the heart of the Cowboys country end up being the biggest Kansas City Chiefs fan I've ever met? And I've got family in Kansas City, so that's quite an accomplishment. Enough rambling from Michael Regan. Let's turn it over to our friend John Donnelly. John, good to see you, brother.
Hey, happy to be here, man. I'm excited to share and can't wait to dig into our conversation today.
Well, me too. And just keep in mind, folks, we're doing our best to draw from real experts out in sales and entrepreneurial roles. John's had some experience in both, and how those have evolved into leadership roles. So I hope you're going to be taking some notes. And John, I'd love to kick us off with a little bit of background. What was your point of entry to find this industry? I know a lot of people like to learn about your background in this industry. I'm curious, like, what was going on before you found the housing industry, and what was your on-ramp to this particular role with this company?
That's a good question. I haven't talked about that in a while. I met my wife when I worked at CompUSA and I sold her computer on New Year's Day. And that was kind of an interesting way to meet somebody. And we just kind of clicked. And fast forward about a year, I didn't like doing that job necessarily. And one of her friends worked in accounting at a mortgage company, said they're hiring. And so I went and got a job as a loan officer at a mortgage company in a call center in 1997. And so that was like my way in. And that was a crazy time. And learning in a call center gave me a lot of reps. And eventually I wanted to be a real loan officer, as I would say, and go out and talk to realtors and do purchases and that type of thing. So kind of evolved out of that call center over about 3 or 4 years. And that began my life as a mortgage banker, if you will. And I've been doing it now, probably as a loan officer, referral based loan officer since about 2000, probably I would guess since 2000. Played all different roles and loved it, the whole journey of it, to be honest. So yeah, I don't get asked about how it started, but that's the truth. Like that's how it started. And then looking back, I've only been at 2 companies since 2002, and that's kind of interesting in itself. The only reason I left my last company is because it imploded in 2009, along with that particular day 109 other companies, and I ended up coming to Service First and got lucky, in my opinion, to find Sean Broussard in our company, and just had a great growth story ever since. And it's, I'm still making that story today. So it's awesome.
That's
Yeah,
great.
Kathryn, I don't know about you, but I find that growth is often found, or as you just called it, John, you got lucky. I find luck shows up often where someone is very diligently at work. And Kathryn, I know that's true of you too. When you hear that background and that story, I saw your face smile. Tell me the thought that's going through your head when you imagine a young John Donnelly meeting his wife at a CompUSA.
I do love that story. Thanks for sharing that. I think that one of the things that having a job like that can teach you those early sales skills. So tell us maybe some of the lessons you learned as a young professional that you're still applying today.
Yes, that's a great question, Kathryn. I think that, I was incentivized. I worked at Best Buy and CompUSA early on. The first thing I learned was that if I connect with people and listen to them, which is, everybody has a power skill, if you will, like their
Mhm.
one thing. Mine, I would believe, is listening. Well, I learned to develop that. I really didn't know how to frame it, but I learned to listen to people, and I would sell them warranties and I would make spiffs, extra money. And I made a lot of money doing that. I was one of the top sales guys. And so I started to figure out things like how to relate to a consumer and how to listen to them, and then, share a story. I would tell a story around an experience that happened to me, how my computer got fried and how the warranty saved my life. And, I created this whole thing. I never had sales training or anything like that. And then eventually I find Zig Ziglar, and Zig Ziglar was my guy. Like, if there's anybody in my life, he was the guy that taught me about sales and goals. And then that turned to Brian Tracy and Tony Robbins. And I started figuring out that there's a lot to learn from these people in the world. But, to this day, to this moment, I still use those listening skills. My thing I
Mhm.
talk about all the time is wait. Why am I talking? WAIT, and that repeats in my head all the time. When I find myself talking too much, I'm telling myself, "Hey, you're talking too much. Let the other person talk." So that's just a little thing I do. But I would say I developed that skill early on in sales, and I didn't really know what I was doing. It just happened, you know.
So, John, that makes me curious. You mentioned a few of those people, and I'm sure those are names that our listeners know. Those are well-known leaders in terms of sales and influencing folks that are moving into the mindset of sales. What was it about some of those folks or others that really got your attention? It's not just their name. Brian Tracy's a well-known name, or Zig Ziglar's a well-known name. What was it about either their content or the way they delivered their content that got your attention? Where did you grab on?
I think that it was the fact they had a plan, and there was some direction, and it was different than anything I'd heard from my parents or my church or my friends. And it was the idea that I could be so much bigger and do so much more in my life than what maybe I even had considered. I think that's what really opened my eyes to it. I think it was, I had a CD set, or a cassette tape of Unlimited Power, maybe Tony Robbins, and then I got into CDs of goals setting by Zig Ziglar. And I just burned through these things, almost like probably could nerd out on it. And other people are listening to the radio, and I'm over here figuring out how to set goals and do things. And man, I didn't realize the impact it was going to have in my life. That kind of learning I was doing at an early age. But I think that's it, Michael. The thing is, I started learning that I'm capable of a lot more than I gave myself credit for. I think that's it. And I've learned that lesson a couple of times now. Even looking back at when I started coaching with you guys and building champions, I wrote a life plan, and I would say I wish somebody would challenge me to make it bigger, because I did it, and I should have thought, dream bigger on it. So,
Mm,
you know,
I love that. And so you had listed a whole fun list of personal board of directors, which I always look at that a little differently. So when I saw your post, I'm like, oh, the way John looks at it is pretty fascinating. Because um, the way that I've seen personal board of directors is the people you run a decision by before you make it: accountant, friends, coach, things like that. But you looked at it differently, and I loved that perspective. So you had Zig Ziglar, who we've talked about, Peyton Manning, Tom Hanks, Walt Disney. So some people you probably aren't calling on the phone, but
right.
I loved that those were the influential people over time. And so how did you come up with that list? And tell us about that process, because I thought that was super fun when I saw your post.
Yeah, I think my mindset going into that was, who am I trying to become? And and who would I model myself after? Like, who's having success, carrying themselves in a certain way. I've kind of came up with this term that is a class act. Like, who is a class act that I'm trying to model myself after? Meaning, the littlest thing, from maybe the way they enter the room versus, you know, not necessarily everything they've accomplished. How do they dress? How do they carry themselves? How are they prepared? You know? And so I made a list, and it's hard to make that list because, you know, you can overthink it. I know I'm an overthinker sometimes. I made my list. I picked 10 people that came to my mind, and I wrote why. So I just put that down. And, and every person kind of is different. Doesn't mean I've even met them all.
Mhm.
It doesn't, it's just my view of that person from the outside, but it's a person I want to model myself after. I was given some advice that I thought was interesting. Apparently there's another book by Napoleon Hill called Success Secrets I haven't read. It's Not Think and Grow Rich. And in that book, it challenges you to take this group of 10 and close your eyes and pretend you're having a conversation with them. And what do they tell you? Like, what would they tell you about you? And it's kind of interesting. I haven't got anywhere with that. I've tried it once, but the guy that shared it with me, his name is Michael Mintz, and he runs sales for a home builder. And he said when he did it, Jim Rohn kept leaning into him saying, "Who do you want to be?" And he couldn't figure it out for like 3 weeks. And he kept going back to that meditation, going, "Who do I want to be? I don't know, Jim. I don't know what you're asking me." And finally, he put his fist down on the table. And this is in his meditation, and said, "When you die, what do you want to be known for?" And he goes, it just clicked at that moment. And I was like, man, that's a powerful story. That's such a cool thing. So I'm trying to get there with that meditation. Hadn't worked for me quite yet, but the idea of, how do I become a class act? How do I become, when somebody thinks of me, how do they describe me, and is it a class act? That's where I'm going with it. That's kind of my mindset, you know. And so that's my journey.
Well, John, you describe that in a way that, of course, starts getting the wheel turning in my head around what you described as a life planning exercise, and hearing the story of that visualization of that table, and the actual audible communication that you're having with these inspirational people around that table, and the leaning in of, who do you want to be? Like, as I listen to that, I think, man, I've got to find a way to weave that into my coaching on life planning, because it really gets you to that place of
Mhm.
beginning with the end in mind. And we, of course, use the visualization of the funeral, which is hard for some people because it conjures up some negative emotion, in addition to the potential of that type of legacy that you're leaving. So I like that. Let's spend some more time exercising that one as we go forward. So now I want to pivot a little bit. You know, you're talking about some of these folks that over the last 25, maybe 30 years have been a big part of inspiring you to grow. Who are you listening to today? What are you reading today? Like, who are some of the voices that today are still spurring you to keep that journey of growth going?
Yeah, I think one of them for me is John Maxwell is a go-to guy for me. I just can't get enough for some reason. Whenever I need to hear something, I go to him. His podcast is great. I'm always picking up books, and just, maybe I go through the first couple chapters and it's not for me, or maybe it's, I can't get enough of it, and I keep reading. My big one lately, and maybe you're teeing me up for this, is this 12-hour walk book that I've been just eat up with. Colin O'Brady is the author. I unfortunately missed him at an event. I didn't get to see him in the past, but he wrote this book called The 12-Hour Walk, and it challenges you to go and have a 12-hour conversation with yourself. You know, you don't necessarily have to walk the whole time, but no phones, you know, no people, no headphones, and just think about, what are the limiting beliefs that are holding you back to get where you want to be in life. And so that's a big one for me. I can go into that a little bit more if you want, Michael, and talk about my journey there. But you know, there's another book called Comfort Crisis that's right in there with it. I forgot the author, but that book is awesome too. You should check that book out along with this.
Well, let's spend a little bit of time on this one, John, because in the context of what we're talking about, I think what you discovered on your 12-hour walk might be really interesting to the audience, because that's not an exercise that anyone ever says, I'm just going to just going to go do that. It takes some inspiration. And I think sometimes that inspiration has to come from a story that caused them to say, okay, I'm going to give something like that a shot. Clearly it was Colin's story that drove you to give it a shot, but I'd like to now hear your story, because my understanding is your story is now beginning to slowly inspire some other people to do the same.
It seems like it is, and that's exciting to me. That really moves me, I guess, if you will, to share more. But yeah, so what I did is I read this book, and I don't necessarily think there was I wasn't in a place that I had something I had to sort out. You know, like sometimes people find themselves like, I need to go and just spend time alone. I wasn't necessarily in that place, but I just wanted to take action. So I read this book, and I told my wife, hey, next Sunday I'm walking 12 hours. I'm headed out of the front door at 5:15 in the morning. I got my backpack and stuff, and pick me up at this time. Just find me on Life 360. And she's like, okay, you know, like whatever. And so, you know, I start going, and I have a couple of tools. You're not supposed to, you know, really use your phone or anything, but I used the journal app, and I just talked notes into it as I went. Every once in a while, I made a video to myself about things I was thinking of. And I went through a lot of emotion, if you will. There was moments of, why am I even doing this? This is not my best use of time to I literally walked an hour, and I looked up and I couldn't believe where I was, and I don't remember walking. Like, that's how deep I got into thoughts at some moments. And I walked 29 miles that day, which was a personal record. Like, who knew you could even walk 29 miles? And I felt it for sure. What's crazy is I jogged the last half a mile. I was so inspired by whatever I had done. And my wife, she didn't find me exactly where I was, so I had to run to her, and I wanted to go home. But I was pumped. You know, I wrote 17 pages of notes. I thought about a lot of stuff. And one of my big inspirations is you know, I'm turning 50 in October, and I wanted to do something that was awesome. And I have this whole story that kind of leads up to that moment of, you know, years ago, I got to see Bob Goff a couple of times, and he planted this seed about climbing Kilimanjaro. And then Sean, our owner, and I kind of talked about doing it right before the pandemic, and then that kind of derailed us. And I was like, that's it. Like, that's my thing. You know, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So I found a friend of mine, Baylor Barbie, who I've been talking to a little bit about this. And I said, hey, let's go. You've been talking about it. I've been talking about it. So we booked it. We're going in February. And I'm excited to hopefully summit Kilimanjaro and have some kind of moment that, you know, I feel good about. You know, I'm excited about that.
Holy cow.
Yeah, John, it's big, right?
That's awesome. So I'm imagining this walk and you kind of going through these emotions, and turning 50 is big. I'm close to that too. So I can definitely relate to that feeling of, okay, what's next? What's next? So after you got done with the walk, kind of explain the breakdown of what you did and how you kind of took that moving forward, and then how you've brought that to other people.
The first thing I did was, as I was finishing, I just made a video to talk about, well, I could capture. I thought, you know what, I'll capture my real emotion of what I'm doing by doing a video now. And I didn't chop it up. I just posted it. And I did that, posted that video, and then I came back home. And the next day, because I was really tired, I didn't do much. And the next day I took all my notes and started diving deep into those notes. And what does all this mean? And why am I talking about this stuff? Some of it doesn't matter. You know, you look at it and you're like, okay. But there were some takeaways in there. And, you know, I just kind of processed through that. And then I realized, like, what I'm doing, other people are going to connect with this a little bit. So I started kind of framing this story I'm telling you guys, like, what is this journey I'm on, and what is this going to look like? Started talking to my friend Baylor about it. And it just so happens he's written 7 books and he's got 3 coming out. He's like, we came up with this idea of documenting our journey, and let's write a book together about 2 perspectives, of different perspectives of people doing the exact same thing. So we're like putting notes together to what would be my first book. Hopefully I pull it off. But we want to document this, at least for ourselves, right? But you go through and you just have to look through all these notes and go, what matters and what can I take action on, and what's important here, and what have I learned? And I've been reflecting back on that now for about a month. And the one thing I keep coming out of, the other thing is my takeaway. It took me a little while to figure out where I was going, is I've been in this business a long time, and I hear a lot of people that remember the glory days of mortgage or what they used to be. And I've had great success. I'm really proud of a lot of things I've done, but I don't want those times to define me yet. I want my times to be the next 5 years. I want it to be something significant that I do and make an impact somewhere. And that's putting myself out there. Like, I'm putting myself out there. I'm saying, I want to grow. I want to impact people. I want to do big things personally. I joined a gym and started working out really hard 3 days a week with a trainer, all because of all this stuff. So the energy and the momentum I get is great. And anyway, that's where my head's gone with all this kind of stuff from this walk.
John, you know what I love about your recap, and especially the way, Kathryn framed that, because again, there are some very tactical things that our audience can grab from that, but I hope they grabbed this. You don't tend to talk about pivotal events in your life as historical moments. You tend to talk about them as future moments. You tend to describe pivotal events that haven't happened yet, things that you're looking forward to doing, things that you are excited about experiencing or accomplishing. I mean, even as you're talking about this hike on Kilimanjaro, I've got some goofy soundtrack to an old Toto song playing in my head, and I can picture you in the Serengeti, like you're going for it. You're really doing that naturally. In fact, that comes across in a way that I'm sure you don't, as I'm telling you, you're probably like, I don't know, I'm just talking.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that's really, I think, attractive about you as a person who engages in many platforms. So I'd like to maybe take your comment about recording while it was fresh, because that felt like a more authentic version of the emotion. And I want to play that forward as well. You're a guy who leaned into social media back when most people were self-promoting, and you took a slightly different angle to that, and your experience with social media has been a little different. Tell us a little bit about how you think about the way that you engage and what that experience has been like for you.
Yeah, I made a commitment in 2019 to kind of start the year to post every day during the week, at least, on social media. And that's a really hard commitment for me to get through that. Like, how do you even post every day? What do you come up with? And so I fought through that for a while and started building a system. But the posting for me was through the lens of, what am I doing? Who am I as a leader? And what is it like to work with me here at Service First? And so some of it's document the day and just kind of show the things we're doing. Some of it is, me personally, like, Kathryn picked up on my little, board of directors thing. That's just stuff I'm processing in my own self, in my own life, my own personal growth. And so I'm trying to show people who I am. And hopefully that attracts the right people to me. And, the other people, maybe they're not a good fit to work with me, that kind of thing. What's one takeaway is most people know I'm a Chiefs fan, and I grew up in Kansas City. And so I was a Chiefs fan before, Taylor Swift came around and all that. So, that's a thing. But it's been really cool that we've been good finally. And that when that happens, I have never had more text messages, more messages on social media about the Chiefs. I got so many people saying, I'm rooting for the Chiefs because of you, So the advice I would give people is figure out something you're passionate about and just talk about it, because you'll connect with people, whatever it is. It could be cooking or sports or whatever, just whatever you're passionate about, people will connect to you. And that's the kind of interaction that I think has been the most coolest thing that I've learned. Now, the other side of that is, I had to build a system. I had to start posting, and, I'm not trying to be an influencer. Let's be honest. I do the social media. I like the creativity, but I'm not trying to be that. And, what's happening for me is I'll go to like an industry event and I'll literally have 2 or 3 or 4 people come up to me and tell me about my post. And I think back on it, and I'm like, nobody's ever commented or liked on this. How did they even know, what I'm doing? So people see it, like they really see it. And once I really figured that out, it just gave me the energy to just do it. I just keep posting and keep going, and that those little feedback moments are what drives me. That keeps me doing it. Otherwise, sometimes you're like, why do I even do all this and put all this work into this social media? But anyway, that's my journey. That's what I've been on.
A couple things, John. First, I just want to point out that influence is not likes or comments, it's influence, right? So I'm glad that you're influencing people, and I see a lot of your posts. So I know that's certainly true for myself. But second, because I'm a nerd, when it involves systems, tell me a little bit about your social media system.
Yeah, I use so as what I learned was some of my posts can be evergreen, and I specifically think about that sometimes because I can't always come up with content every day, or I'm traveling, I'm busy. And so I've created a system, if you will, to capture those evergreen posts that I can reuse. And what I've learned is that not the first time I post something isn't always the biggest, impact. Sometimes the second or third time I posted it is. And so I found this thing I was looking up called Airtable. And Airtable is a website that has allowed me to, capture my post, it kind of looks like a spreadsheet, and put the last time I posted it. So it's just like a system for me to follow, and it's searchable. So I can search all my posts by words, and I can see like, hey, today I really want to talk about this subject. What have I talked about before? I might even use the words, but change the picture, that type of thing. Because what you'll find is there's probably 5 or 6 things you kind of always talk about. Those are your things, And so you got to re-say that same message a lot of different ways sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's what I do. So Airtable is my system. I don't do anything really too fancy. I have gone through all the iterations of trying services and doing things that I'm down to. I use the app called Captions, and Captions is good for me. That's my tool. I record on my phone and I track things with Airtable and I post, and that's it. There's not really a lot more to it. So
Keep it simple. I like that a lot. And Kathryn, that's a great question you asked, because I think a lot of people do wonder, well, what are some of the tips that those of us that have been effective are using? And John, it's so good to hear you say, yeah, here's my favorite tip. I found one I like, I stick with it, and I keep it simple. That's refreshing, because we often make that really complicated. Listen, I want to talk a little bit here about the way that you've transitioned personal growth into the culture with your team, and really cascading that into your organization, because you guys have really done some amazing things for a company of your size. You guys are really, really doing some fun things. And while this isn't, a promotion for Service First directly, it's more of, I want to hear how you've, as a leader, helped guide some of that. And I think what I just heard in Kathryn's question and a few others prior is you're really intentional about your growth strategies. I'm not saying you can't be reactive when the moment requires it. Maybe an opportunity just lands in your lap and you can jump, but you seem to spend a lot of time preparing for things and being in a position to where when that opportunity comes, you're really ready to strike. Tell us a little bit about that mindset of preparation and that mindset of how to know when to be proactive and maybe when it's best to be reactive.
That's interesting. I think the first thing that comes to mind is you have to know your team, and you have to really have a personal connection with the people you're leading, and that's going to drive the decisions you make on how you interact with them, or how you take that culture somewhere. I've been here 15 years, so I've got to see a lot of change and a lot of growth, and if you look back in the beginning days, I feel like we didn't know what we were doing, and compared to today, yeah, we've really grown. It starts with yourself, right? You got to want to change and grow, and that inspires people, but also you've got to put them in a position to grow. And what's happened over time is, we went to a lot of industry conferences, and that was great. And what we learned was that we could do some of this stuff ourselves. So we started having sales summits of our own, like our own way, the service first way that we do things, and bringing in the people that spoke to us most. And then that turned into some coaching groups that we led. And just as the seasons change, we adapt and try to provide the things that people need. We're actually going through a change right now because we came out of COVID, and then it got not too good in our industry. And now it's like, what does it look like going forward? Like, I feel like that pivot's happened. And now what? Now we don't work together. Mostly everybody's at home, and you can't even find your realtor partners. And so we're trying to figure that out a little bit. I'm going into next month, we're doing an in-person meeting where we're going back to getting clarity on where we're going, just the basics, get back to the basic things of, track your efforts and have a clear vision of where you're going. And that's going to open up to more things. The other piece of it is probably I have a passion for just working with the community, and here I've been able to help be part of a group that we call it a culture committee, where we've been able to find different organizations and do fundraisers and all that kind of stuff. It's been really cool. Am I the only one that drives that? No. Am I a big voice on it? Probably yes. Like, that's a big thing that I drive, that I think is cool. It just brings everybody together. So
Yeah, John, we've talked about a lot of those things you're doing in the community over the years. So I've had a glimpse of some of those opportunities. I'm curious, and it could be a combination of when you're front facing in your community, but it also could be internally when you're gathering the team together to talk about the strategies that you all have going forward. What are some of the filters you use to protect the culture you've created? Because you described a culture that's evolved, because as you guys have grown, you certainly have experienced some things, and you're humble about it, but you said, hey, we've kind of figured out how to do some things today that, 10, 15 years ago, we were just figuring it out. Well, now you figured it out. What does that filter system look like for you? How do you keep the good in and keep the distractions out?
we have like 7 words of a filter: good, happy, energetic, positive, productive, professional, we people. We've literally written that on a wall. We came up with that probably 10 years ago. And there's a group of us that sat around a table and said, who are we? Like, what are our people? And I know it's really simple words, but that's who we are. We're good people. We're professional. We're highly trained professionals that want to do good work in the business. And, we respect each other. We don't yell at each other. We work as a team. There's just things that we use as a filter. And I'll bet you everybody on our leadership team can rattle those words off just like I did. And, we march together. If somebody doesn't fit, it's funny how they almost get out of our organization faster than we can ask them to leave, because they just know it. They feel it, so we know who we are. We're clear on that, and we look to try our very best to hire the people that fit in our organization. And a lot of people are good people and that type of thing in our business, but not everybody. And so we just learned that over time. And so yeah, we definitely have filters, and that's just our process we've been through. We know them, we say them, and we try to live by them.
John, I think that you kind of emulate those words so much to me, and probably Michael would agree with me on that. And I think it's so important to have those words, even if you're in office and listening to this, to have those things of, hey, what are the most important things? Are they good people? Are they professional? Are they happy? Those kind of pieces can be so huge to create a team. So thanks, John, for bringing that up, and just to throw that out to have it be applicable, even if you don't have a company that you're in charge of, but even just your friend group or your team at work. And we are getting close to the end. I don't know how that happened. That was so fast. So do you have any closing thoughts for us, Michael? Any closing questions? And then I'm going to pose the same thing to John.
I appreciate that, Kathryn. I'm going to make a quick observation. John, you talked earlier in the podcast about that filter you use internally about being a class act. I love that phrase because it's a very clear visual that each of us gets to set for ourselves. You know, we all have maybe a different version of that, but you're really clear on what that means to you. And I've seen it. And I think it's part of why, as a listener, as you mentioned earlier as well, you combine those two, and somewhere in being a listener who's a class act, that's a superpower, no doubt about it. And hearing you, in fact, I'd like to say to our audience, if you're listening on our Apple podcast and not watching on our YouTube, you probably didn't get the pleasure of watching John rattle off all 7 of those, and there was no script. John's not reading anything. Kathryn's exactly right. They're coming out of you. They're just emulating. It's such a great word, Kathryn. You reflect what you expect from the culture that you've created, and I don't think there's a question here. I just want to affirm that when I hear you say these things with us, and then I watch you live it in real life, you're a real model of that authenticity, and I just appreciate that about you. So thank you for sharing some of the truth that I think guides the daily routines that you have.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. I have one last quick little story to wrap up if you want. I think about your podcast called Building Bigger Lives. And there's something that you said earlier that made me remember this story, Michael. But in 2015, I wrote a life plan. And in that life plan, I wanted to buy a lake house, and I wanted to have my family go to this lake house and experience traditions of holidays. I wanted there to be a driveway that turned. I wanted there to be a tire swing in the tree, and I wanted you to see the front door and you could see the lake through that lake house. And I did it. I did it. Michael's been there. He's seen this. When I was putting my house up for sale, I recently sold this house. It was almost 10 years old. My kids are moving on in other parts of their life, and just nobody's going out there. So I feel like that chapter is ending. But when I was selling it, the agent had a drone out there. And I said, hang on. I opened the window of the front door and the back doors, and I flew that drone right through there, right down that driveway, right out. And so I have this video of that vision I created. I think that's so cool. And, whatever I said earlier was like, dream bigger, play bigger. We say that at Service First, play big. I think that we're capable of so much more than what we can dream of sometimes. And so I'm trying to play big, and I hope that story kind of excites whoever's listening today to think bigger and dream bigger. So.
Oh, John, that was great. Wrapping it up perfectly of vision, dreaming, class act. Those are the themes I took away today. Thank you so much for being here, John. It's great to see you again. It's been a pleasure to know you, and I'm excited to hear more. Please come back after you have your book done, and we'll get to hear about that. We'll read it and break it all down in our book club episodes. So please let us know when that's complete. And thank you as always for the contribution that you make to our industry and to us, and of course to the podcast today. Michael, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank you as well, John. That visual is crystal clear to me because you're right. We got to experience it together, and I can't wait for us to come up with some new visions that'll include some great barbecue and some great experiences. So thanks for being a part of my life, and I look forward to many adventures to come.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. This has been great.
All right. Thanks for joining us on Building Bigger Lives. And again, you'll find us on Apple Podcasts. You'll find us on YouTube, and we will look forward to catching you on an episode soon. Have a great day, everyone.